Now, I would like to introduce our last speaker, very important one, Mr. Smale. He is going to bring us to the Netherlands to see for smart grid development. Robin is a PhD candidate with the Environmental Policy Group at the University of Wagningen in the Netherlands. He studied environmental sciences there, specializing in environmental policy with a minor in development sociology at Lund University. In his PhD project titled Emerging Energy Practices in the Smart Grid, Robin aims to shed light on how smart grid innovations will change the daily life of ordinary households in Europe. Without further ado, please join me to welcome Robin to give us the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daphne, for your introduction and your kind words. What I like up for in the academic titles, which my predecessors have, I make up for in a very impressive title to my presentation. So Smart Grids, Information Flows, and Emerging Energy Practices, the Dutch Experience and Implications for China. Essentially, the presentation will be about consumer involvement, consumer participation in smart grids. So we're down that line. My own work, my own research is about halfway, a little bit less. But since I'm a sociologist, that will not stop me from still saying a lot of things. So without further ado, let me just dive into it. I see I've put the minutes there. So I will first introduce the Dutch case, then present the research that we've been doing at my faculty. I'll go in depth into my own work as well as one of my colleagues. And I'll draw some conclusions on the Dutch case in general, and then describe some implications, some possible connections to the Chinese case study. So the Dutch context, it's important to realize that we're in a transition from gas to electricity. So this is a Dutch slide, but the core thing here to note is that the red part there is a gas bubble that was discovered in the Netherlands. Gas being a major source of power now in the Netherlands, but becoming out of favor now because we have earthquakes happening because we're getting too much gas. And you can also see here that renewables are kind of making a comeback here. Before, of course, it was wood, and now we have renewables. So in terms of renewable energy, we are very much behind on the rest of Europe, but now it's accelerating. Actually, you can see here that the Netherlands is the only red country, so less than 5% of energy produced in the Netherlands is renewable, which is a bit of a shame. And of that 5%, a majority is biomass. A little bit of it is solar energy, and that part is increasing now. So the intermittent part, the intermittent renewable energy, is increasing. Another unique aspect, at least fairly unique about the Netherlands, is that we have a lot of energy cooperatives, 400 to 500. So a lot of Dutch people are very much interested in energy as a topic, but a lot of them are also not interested. So the 20% of frontrunners who are very much involved with energy, they're also a very sort of specific demographic. So they're the baby boomer generation. There's a lot of time on their hands. Most of them are men, but a lot of people are also not interested. So, and some people are very much against energy innovations. So it's very much a segmented and diverse population that we're dealing with here, if we're talking about the Dutch context. Now, John Cheng was very much right about the state of affairs with smart grids in Europe and the Netherlands specifically. It can be really summarized with one word: flexibility. That's the main issue right now. A lot of reports, they start to describe, they argue that the search for flexibility is on, essentially. And should we get that flexibility in the electricity grid from businesses, from consumers? A lot of research is going underway. The smart meter is being rolled out at a very rapid pace across Europe, and the Netherlands specifically very fast now. It's hard to say how quickly, but we're about a quarter underway of giving everyone a smart meter. And this is handled by the renewable energy, by the state-owned distribution electricity companies. There are a lot of smart grid pilots going on at the moment. These are also mostly managed by the state-owned distribution companies. So we have a liberalized energy sector in the Netherlands. We have energy companies which sell energy as private corporations. And we have the institutions that manage the grid, and they are public-owned. And they are the main factor, the key factor in the managing of the smart grid. So these are some reports that have recently came out, also at the European level, all describing this flexibility challenge and putting flexibility as a central concern. Oh, I'm moving back. Yeah, okay. So 3 examples of pilot projects that happen in the Netherlands that are quite representative of many more pilot projects going on. These are also the ones where we are doing research. So one is all about balancing supply and demand, testing new technologies. Another one is about how to engage consumers in grid management with an energy cooperative as intermediary. And another one is about managing peak shaving and managing the grid directly, so without the intermediary energy cooperative. And there a lot of peak shaving is being tested. So in our work, as sociologists, we sit at the coffee tables at the at the counter. We talk with at the dinner table. That's the word, with the participants of pilot projects, and by sort of piecing together the experiences of these pilot project participants, we try to piece together a picture of what daily life will look like in the smart grid as we currently envision it. Now, my faculty's perspective on smart grids is that they're not just technical systems, but rather they reorganize consumer utility relations, they challenge established energy behaviors, and they offer new ways, excuse me, and they offer new ways to promote sustainable consumption. As a theoretical perspective, we argue that people don't just consume energy, rather they use energy to perform daily activities while they go about their lives. This energy consumption is highly routinized behavior, it's contextual, it's situated, and oftentimes it's non-rational. This matches up very well with practice theory, and the energy behaviors that we aim to analyze, we call them energy practices. And these energy practices, well, these are some of the ones that we see emerging in the smart grid. Of course, there's timing of use, so people are requested, are incentivized to time their electricity consumption in accordance with when electricity is abundant and cheap. People also have insight into their own electricity consumption, so monitoring is also a new behavior. A lot of new social activities can also arise in the smart grid when energy becomes visible as a topic in the community. And finally, there's energy storage and mobility, both of which can't really be separated because electric vehicles are also energy storage devices. And there's also new behaviors surrounding these new modes of electricity storage. Now, there are some social challenges when it comes to these kind of behaviors. So smart grids rely on smart routines. How can residents be involved in the long run? What we see now is that consumers, they are interested at first, but at some point they stop being involved with energy. They want to go back to their daily routines, and they stop time shifting, they stop checking how much energy they are consuming, etc. There's questions related to the inclusivity of smart grids. Some routines are also very hard to break. And how do you service a very diverse population as the Netherlands has? And there's more challenges to describe. So what role should energy cooperatives play, a big stakeholder in the Netherlands? And how should the smart grid be designed so that it empowers households and not just turns them into sort of co-managing actors that are sort of controlled and disciplined by the smart grid? So in terms of our research framework, it's best described as this. We see households that are interconnected and are opened up. So energy becomes visible due to the ICT technology. We've got energy collectives and utility providers in a new sort of dialogue. And these three actors together are the subject of our study. So one of my colleagues whose research I will talk about, Yuri Naus, he focuses on the role of these new information flows in how they transform energy behavior, as well as all privacy and autonomy concerns. I myself focus on cultural aspects of smart grid. So how does the smart grid change our cultural understanding of energy, as well as how flexible are we in our behavior? And then my colleague also works on more the technological part. My supervisor is more focused on the organization, although we all work on this, and intermediation, and it is all overseen by my professor. So I'm going to focus on these two. Now, we argue that there are three new information flows that transform energy behavior between household members. Household members tap into this energy and information infrastructure, and this has consequences for social relations. So, for example, a mother can now check on her child when that child is using the Xbox, when he's not supposed to, for example. So this changes social relations inside the household as well. Then there are new information flows between the household and the utility operator, as well as, of course, between local and distant households. So within energy cooperations, people now have insight into each other's renewable energy production, for example. All of this changes the energy practices of people, as well as social relations. Now, participation in the smart grid as a consumer involves a vertical and a horizontal opening up of the household. So vertical meaning between households and the utility company, and horizontally it means an opening up of the household between households. This participation we group in the form of three main practices, let's say. Energy monitoring, renewable energy generation, and time shifting. And these can be organized in three main ways. So privately, people can monitor their own electricity, of course, but they can also share it with fellow households, or they can share the data of their energy consumption with service providers. Renewable energy can be produced domestically, of course, but it can also be produced collectively. So in a neighborhood, people can group together and purchase solar panels. And it can be also vertically integrated, that consumers, for example, pay service providers to upgrade and get more renewables. Time shifting, very important, of course, the peak shaving part, can also be managed privately as well as horizontally. I mean, there's pilots going on now where energy collectives are approached by a utility company and are motivated to start communicating to all of their members to start shifting their energy use. And then the energy cooperative, the people who are active with energy in the community, they are the ones that are sort of trying to translate between this technical people at the utility company and the interested but not experts, the citizens. And of course, a very vertical way of doing time shifting is just through demand control, where utility companies have direct access to switching off your washing machine when energy is scarce, or switching it on again. Now, what my colleague found is that households support both horizontal and vertical cooperation forms, but they run into specific privacy and autonomy issues impeding this participation. There's peer pressure, people are worried about surveillance, there's new conflicts arising between household members, also with neighbors. Local energy collectives are a nice middle ground. People are not so afraid of energy collectives. Energy companies, they're very hesitant for, and they're also distrusting of. And all these households, they show a desire to cooperate with green service providers. Now, decentralized systems in particular are promising because they enable a bundling of these energy practices, either on a private level, or horizontal level, or vertical level. And they can, these new decentralized forms of cooperation, they enable a renegotiation of these relationships. So there is diversity in the ways in which energy companies can engage with consumers. It does not only have to be directly from customer, from business to customer. It can also be via an intermediary organization which is trusted on the community level, like an energy collective. Now, let me turn to the cultural perspective of my own research. I use a moral economy approach, which I can't really explain much now, but on Thursday I'll also give a seminar, a lunch seminar, and I'd be happy to go into detail more then. But I'm interested in the cultural aspects. That's what I mentioned. Now, in that framework, we believe that households consume energy in the way that they believe is the right way. So there are good and bad practices. And households, they make implicit and explicit agreements on the way we do things at home. And this can be very casual kind of agreements. And at the same time, practices also have moral imperatives. So people don't just shower because they need to get clean. I mean, people shower because it's comfortable. There are a lot of reasons why people do things. And the practices perspective says that we should look at showering as a cultural practice over time, one that has changed meaning a lot. I mean, back in the day, showering was to get clean. Now it's not primarily to get clean. It's a lot of other reasons as well. Now, for example, laundry, doing the laundry demands a sort of regularity. Yeah, and I mentioned the showering example. Now, how does these cultural traits of energy behavior, how do they clash or align with the cultural aspects of smart energy systems? That's the topic of my PhD. Now, getting a little bit to the results of my work, I attempt to describe a flexibility profile of Dutch households. So I attempted to cluster different kinds of behaviors in the home on the basis of cultural, of a cultural understanding of them. So I grouped them into lighting and heating spaces, leisure and cooking and eating, and domestic cleaning practices. At the end, you can see how much each of these clusters are responsible for the electricity consumption at home. So they're all pretty significant contributors to domestic energy consumption. Now, what we see is that with lighting and heating, it's important to be frugal, to be careful, not to use too much. Lighting and heating spaces can be elastic. The demand for it can be elastic, strictly if there is no loss of comfort, of course. People don't want to be cold for any amount of money. The rhythm of it is sort of seasonal, and it is very inflexible on a daily basis. Now, when it comes to leisure and cooking and eating, control of when you do it is very important. You can indulge a bit, that's also culturally permitted, and people do it at times of the day when they are what we call cold spots. So people don't want to be bothered so much by doing the right thing, being environmentally aware at times when you want to relax during the day. Now, and then we also have domestic cleaning practices. There also it's important that they have a certain frequency, that you're careful, frugal. It has a weekly rhythm, and there's some planning involved. And this is very flexible. So what we see is with lighting and heating spaces, perhaps automation is the best option for getting demand-side flexibility. Or flexibility contracts, what we've seen in the past as well, I think in France, where people can sign up for a cheap electricity contract, which allows the electricity company to, for example, switch your thermostat down by 2 degrees. So people can sign up for a sort of flexibility contract. This is one form of an intermediary participation. So it's not that people have to be busy with energy the whole day, but rather they sign up for a sort of a flexibility contract. Now, leisure and cooking and eating is a problem. People show no willingness to start shifting these behaviors in time. And I also have no solution for that. But domestic cleaning practices, they are very much flexible. So people are very willing to do the laundry at different times of the day, vacuum clean at different times of the day. And this is important, not necessarily because now it is very important, because using your laundry machine at a different time of the day, it has very little impact on the actual peak of electricity consumption on electricity demand curve. Only like a very minor 1% difference. But later, when we all have electric cars, then it is going to be a big deal. People can't charge their electric car all at the same time, then the grid will obviously explode. So one way to familiarize consumers with the idea of timing, of the idea of using your electricity at a time which matches the rhythm of the grid, is a reason why we should look at flexibility at the consumer level. Now, I also attempt to differentiate households into sort of three ideal types. One which is centered around cheap and comfortable electricity. Another one is oriented around sustainability, and the other one, third one, on autonomy. And the important part here is that people who are interested in sustainability are not necessarily interested to be autonomous or independent from the grid, and the other way around neither. So people who want to be sustainable in terms of their energy use, they just want to sign up with an electricity company which sells them green energy. So they don't want to be grid independent. But then there's also a fair amount of leading, of those front runners, which I described earlier, that invest a lot of time, a lot of money into being completely independent from the grid. But these are also interested in sustainability, but it's a very different kind. And one question remains, is the smart grid sort of the new off-grid? There are indications that the people who are most interested in autonomy and being autonomous from the grid, they are most capable and most interested in participating in the management of a smart grid. So this is a sort of interesting tension. Anyway, you can see that people who are interested in autonomy, they are much more invested and engaged than people who just want to be comfortable in their home. Now, I also argue, and this is a work in progress, that the smart grid also has cultural implications. So I say that whereas before energy mostly focused, the goal of energy management was mostly conservation and more renewable energy, the new sort of goal that gives positive emotions with it is balancing the grid. So that's a big difference. I mean, if you talk to energy cooperatives, they don't want to hear anything about managing and balancing the grid. That's not their thing. Their thing is getting more solar panels, more windmills. They want to have more green electricity. That's a very different thing than balancing the grid. And this also led to some tension within the pilot projects that I was at. They were approached by the utility company to get their constituents to start switching their electricity use. But they were like, why should I do that? I am self-sufficient, I have solar panels. Why not just let me produce more electricity? So this shift in goals is accompanied by a shift in reward system as well, which might favor households with energy literacy and the capacity to act. Also, that links up with what John Chang said earlier about possible inequalities that the smart grid can produce. It also brings rhythm back into energy. I mean, energy used to always have a rhythm, of course, back before the 50s, let's say. I mean, only for a very few decades has energy not had a rhythm. Only maybe a day-night tariff existed in many countries. But energy essentially is always there. And that, of course, has a big cultural impact too. But the smart grid brings rhythm back into the picture. And so we have to look back more than 50 years to see what that actually means. I mean, you can expect that there are conflicting opinions about this. Is this progress or not, bringing rhythm back into it? Planning around energy, is that a new chore for the poor? And are rich people able to avoid this chore? And there's also possible clashes with progressive energy taxation that can lead to problems. And in general, energy switches from a service to a resource with collective responsibility in this smart grid governance picture. Now, I'll just say a few things about the role of energy collectives in smart grids because they're such a major stakeholder in the Netherlands. So what energy collectives do now is collective renewable energy generation, of course. I mean, they buy solar panels together, they invest in windmills together. But in the future, they can also consume electricity collectively. And when they save, when they conserve more electricity together, they can also invest that electricity together in, for example, a park for their children. So there's also collective consumption in this case. It can be that horizontal platform for new effective flexibility, which I mentioned. And what we see is that a proper incentive structure is needed to organize collective demand time shifting. So these energy collectives that we talk to, they are not interested in shifting time unless there is really a lot of money to be gained there. Now what we see is a new mix of vertical and horizontal integration. And these energy companies, they are seeking new sort of business relationships with these energy collectives. And this is, as I mentioned, quite problematic. So energy collectives, they create a lot of uncertainty in the grid because their goal is to be independent from the grid, of course. And renewable energy generation poses, of course, a lot of problems to keeping the grid stable. Whether or not they can be successful business partners, that remains to be seen. Some energy collectives are very professional. I mean, they form companies or associations or institutions, and some energy collectives are just literally 5 people who are sort of interested in the topic, and they talk to some PV panel installer, for example. So there's a huge diversity in energy collectives too, and that has consequences for the engagement with the utility company. Now, whether or not this cooperation, these new corporations that are being tested are successful is really too early to tell, but they're a partner in testing a smart grid. Now, to conclude the Dutch experience so far, we've had a very lively privacy debate, which led to very strict regulations on what data can be shared or not. Public investment in smart grids has really boomed via these utility companies. So these smart grids, the smart meters are funded by taxpayer money. What we see is also an acceleration of smart applications entering the market, and this is market development. So anything that happens in the household, so beyond the meter, that's the market. Anything before the meter, the grid, that's public, let's say. That's the easy way to distinguish it. Now, demand-side management peak shaving potential is currently very insignificant on the householder side, but it is promising in the future. So remember that electric vehicle issue. So right now, it doesn't matter when people use their washing machine much, but in the future, it will be important when people all want to plug in their hybrid car at the same time, then the grid will collapse. So it is important in the future. Now, at the moment, these utilities are developing business models and seeking alignment with consumers, organized and not organized, in the form of pilot projects. Now, let me summarize a few take-home messages. I argued that new information flows open up the households to new forms of horizontal and vertical organization and participation. Energy management practices challenge privacy and autonomy standards. Smart grids have cultural implications too, and it's important to examine the interaction of our current energy culture and this new energy culture that is shaped in the mostly technological domain. Now, regarding timing of use and flexibility, established practices and rhythms are both opportunities and barriers, and there you can keep in mind the 3 clusters that I presented. Now, there are different households, so there are also different kinds of participation and different kinds of business models. So it is very important not to think about the consumer in a simple way, but to imagine the household complexly, and that will lead to a better understanding of the role of consumers in the future smart grid. Okay, to close it off, I will take some of these conclusions and apply them to the Chinese case study. I'm by no means an expert on China and its energy sector, but a little bit of research does reveal some interesting things. So first, let me just summarize some of the Chinese developments on the consumer side of smart grids from my perspective. So Currently, smart grid development is focused on technology. What I read is that also in literature, it's acknowledged that smart grids are not only a technical innovation, but also an institutional innovation. Customer participation needs a developed e-market, energy market, that's beyond doubt. Regulation is mostly oriented at low cost and extensive servicing, which might lead to a mismatch, because that's not exactly what the smart grid offers. And there's a call for pilot projects on increasing acceptance. And there's a few showcase pilot projects. I can't read this myself, but I'm led to believe that this is a very showy pilot project that's currently implemented. This is actually from your work. Important to also realize that this is statistics from the Hong Kong consumer, but if we extrapolate it to the Chinese consumer, we see that there is willingness to change daily patterns of electricity use. Even though what I read is that Chinese consumers are very much happy with the fact that energy is very cheap, this does not necessarily mean that people are not interested in switching time switching and other opportunities the smart grid offers. Now, in terms of household participation, how should these smart energy management practices be organized in China? I mean, energy collectives don't exist in the same way as they do in the Netherlands, of course. So is horizontal organization an option? Or should it be vertical or private? In other words, how should household participation be channeled in smart grids? People don't really own their own energy, renewable energy. It's more centralized there. What we found is that people who own their own solar panels on their roof are much more interested in actually time switching and doing peak shaving than people who don't have renewable energy. So this is an absent motivator to take part in this time switching. Yes, almost done. And household participation requires financial incentives, of course, which in turn needs a mature and liberalized energy market, something which China has not quite arrived yet. And regarding demand-side flexibility, we have to ask ourselves, what is the potential contributions of households to peak shaving, especially in relation to industry. Of course, industry is, there's a lot of manufacturing industry in China. Perhaps households make such a small contribution to the energy curve that it's not at all interesting to do demand-side management with households. Now, there's a need to investigate these energy practices and to assess the flexibility potential, as well as who will be benefiting from rewarding a new sort of rhythm. When it comes to dynamic pricing, it's important to take into consideration the existing progressive energy taxes and pricing. And since cheap energy is a cornerstone of Chinese development, of course, smart grids, the idea is that it reflects more the real costs of energy, and this is a clash. Now, flexibility through demand-side management is political, I argue, and whose responsibility should it be? Should consumers be involved in the management of the grid or not at all? This is also a political question, which should be answered by in any country separately. It's not a technical issue per se. Okay, that concludes my presentation. Sorry for going a little bit over time. I'm happy to answer any questions now, and you can find us also on these media.
Yeah, thanks, Robin, for the very interesting presentation. Do you have any questions? Yeah, yeah. We can have one or two burning questions if you have questions specifically to Robin, and then we will have the panel discussion.
I'm wondering if it would also be useful to group your technologies in ones that people care about and ones that they don't. I mean, personally, I don't care when my refrigerator cycles. I don't care when my hot water heater cycles. I do care when the lights are on. And so you know, there's some that I might be willing to shift, like my washer and dryer and dishwasher, but there are others that I will not shift, and there are others I don't care about. So instead of having them organized by activity, maybe you could also organize them by kind of, you know, how much people interact with that energy function daily. I mean, the cooker you care, the hot water heater you don't care, the heater you know, as long as your house is warm. I'm just wondering if you could respond to that at all, or if you think it would be a useful...
Essentially, thank you for the question. Essentially, I took that for granted. So a certain fraction of the energy consumption at home is just automatic. So like fridges, they're always on, for example. So I'm interested in participation and household behavior that links up with the smart grid. So anything that is completely outside of the participation of the household, I just took for granted. So that's the part that is automation interesting.
Smart grid,
yeah.
That would be interesting.
Yeah, that's true. That's also what the utility companies that I work with say, is that maybe we should not bother at all about getting people to change their behavior. That's so difficult. We should just install some ICT into their boilers, into their automatic systems, and get flexibility in there, because that's much more reliable than going on consumer engagement. Yeah. Yeah.
Just start with the easy stuff,
Yeah.
and then that's like a tiered approach.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's definitely part of it. So my research doesn't quite focus on the domotics bit here, but it's definitely a good suggestion to keep in mind. Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Okay, so now perhaps it's a very good time to have our panel discussion.